Hello, everyone, and welcome. I'm Diana Castelnuovo-Tedesco. I am one of Mario's granddaughters, and I'm thrilled to be here today to introduce a virtual roundtable on a topic very close to my grandfather's heart, his art songs. And I'm joined today by two artists who have been delving into this material for a long time. They're in fact on the third volume of a series called Songs from a Lost World of Italian Jewish Composers. And this third edition is completely dedicated to the music of Castelnuovo-Tedesco. They are Caroline Helton, soprano, and there she is, and Catherine Goodson, collaborative pianist. And I would like to ask them first to introduce themselves and tell us a little bit more about their project.
I'm a professor of voice here at the University of Michigan School of Music, Theater, and Dance, and we've been very lucky to have the support of the School of Music, Theater, and Dance and the Frankel Center for Judaic Studies and the University of Michigan Office for Research to make these important recordings. And so I just say go blue. Thank you for your support. Catherine?
Thank you. I'm thrilled to be part of these projects. Extraordinary repertoire, so unusual, and working with such a wonderful colleague. I am a collaborative pianist and a vocal coach, and I work with instrumentalists, vocalists, composers, and dance as part of the University of Michigan performing staff. And Caroline and I actually met at the Schubert Institute in Baden by Wien many years ago, and we both loved art song then, and it's fantastic to be doing this together now.
Terrific. And we are also joined today by two leading experts on my grandfather's life and music. They are Aloma Bardi and James Westby, two musicologists, and I'd like to ask them to also introduce themselves.
Hello, I'm Aloma Bardi. I'm a music historian. I direct ICAMUS, the International Center for American Music. At ICAMUS, we have worked extensively on Castelnuovo-Tedesco over the years. He's one of the most interesting Italian-American composers. I have personally worked on the music of Castelnuovo-Tedesco, especially some of his unpublished manuscripts, with particular attention to his art songs for a number of years. And I have had the pleasure of collaborating with my research on rare vocal pieces with Caroline Helton and Catherine Goodson in their fascinating programs of art songs. I'm delighted to be taking part in this conversation. Thank you.
Hi, and I'm James Westby, but just call me Jim. That's what I go by. I got my degree at University of California, Los Angeles, and my dissertation was on Mario's film experience at the studios. And I've worked with the family since the early 1990s. Lorenzo was living here in Los Angeles, and Diana's father, Pietro, was in Nashville. We worked with the archive, excuse me, ultimately putting it together and getting it off to the Library of Congress. One of the things about Mario that's so important, and that's certainly part of why you see Aloma and myself being here, Mario's life was split into two sections, and he's a complicated man to study because you need expertise both in Italy and in America, because culturally it was vastly different, and yet it was all absorbed into Mario's experience. And we all need to be working together to get a picture of who this composer was and how his experience fed into his music. And that's where I'm at. Oh, one last thing I cannot forget. I edited the autobiography Una vita di musica. It came out in 2004, and currently finishing the translation. The translation is in a rough draft at the moment, and it will be coming out in the, I would say, near future. But with what's happening in the world today, we don't know what the future what near future means. So we're
That's
moving
right.
forward at good speed.
Absolutely moving forward, and it's a terrific and long-awaited project, exciting project. So before I turn things over to the experts, I just had a few thoughts that I wanted to share with you today. And first and foremost, really at the heart of it, Mario Castelnuovo-Tedesco was a storyteller, and he called himself a musical storyteller. And if you think of any work of his that might come to your mind, you know, whether it's his guitar music or his orchestral music, or, you know, certainly the work that he composed when he was in Hollywood, it's always all about storytelling. And so, you know, that's really became essential to his mission. And this was a calling that came to him very early in life, probably when he was 9 or 10 years old. And given his upbringing, it was not surprising that poetry, and specifically Italian poetry, were some of the first ways that he chose to tell his stories. And we know from his writings that, you know, what we understand from his family life, and especially in my great-grandmother's family, that reading poetry, literature, fairy tales, singing songs around the piano, that these were all very much a part of his growing up experience. And he certainly recounts in his autobiography those long summers in, you know, vacations when he, you know, was reading poetry with friends, and even his friends were writing poetry, friends like Corrado Pavolini, and he would set them to music and play the songs in the evening for his friends. So it just was very natural thing for him. Now, over the years, and as he developed as an artist and greater sophistication and learned many, many things and set poems in many other languages, and certainly with his emigration, had many new and different influences, as Jim touched on. But poetry would remain a constant in his life, and Italian poetry was something that was really an anchor that he returned to again and again. And to tell us more about Italian poetry and kind of what that meant to him and how it fits in with his work, I'd like to ask Aloma to share some more insights.
Thank you, Diana. Yes, Mario Castelnuovo-Tedesco set poetry to music all his life, particularly in his earlier years, and he set to music poetry in many languages, national languages as well as local languages or dialects. All of the songs included in the latest Art Songs program recorded by Caroline Helton and Catherine Goodson set to music Italian poetry, entirely devoted to settings of Castelnuovo-Tedesco, of Italian poetry. Now, what is really interesting here is that the wide diversity of poetry on the program mirrors the variety of inspiration in setting poetry to music that always characterized this composer in his entire career, and is also mirrored in a very striking diversity of musical styles and idioms as well. And the natural inspiration here with which he was capable of mastering all of these styles and idioms was truly one of his greatest gifts. I would like to mention the poets and the individual sets of art songs that comprised this latest recording, because this is so telling about the special diversity and variety of poetry and of musical inspiration that he got from it. Due sonetti del Petrarca, 2 sonnets by Francesco Petrarca. Here we see the highest, the most refined and very influential national Italian poetry of international renown, the 14th century poet Francesco Petrarca, who is the perfect classic of Italian poetry. On a totally different level, we find Quattro scherzi per musica by Messer Francesco Redi. Here we see a 17th century satirical poet, Francesco Redi, who displayed assonance, humor, irreverence, endless plays on words, and is extremely musical already in its literary language that Castelnuovo-Tedesco so promptly and so appropriately grasped in its original inspiration of music. Stella Cadente, Shooting Stars, is another set of our songs by Castelnuovo-Tedesco. Here we see, this is another telling example, we see regional, local, vernacular poetry belonging in the endlessly rich Italian folk heritage, in particular from Florence and from the region of Tuscany. The selection here is a striking 12 very short folk poems from Tuscany, the composer's own beloved region. These are miniatures of reference to local reality and everyday life. Only someone who had been born and grew up in Florence and was so familiar, not just with the city life, but with village and country life in Tuscany, could have perceived all these poetic, literary, cultural, and musical nuances. In his masterful musical setting, they sound so true, so authentic, but at the same time, so elegant, so exquisite and refined in their alternation of humor, irreverence, sadness, all the sentiments reflected in the music. Another example still is Cinque Poesie Romanesche, 5 poems written in the dialect of Rome. Here, Castelnuovo-Tedesco sets to music lesser known poetry by his own contemporary, Mario dell'Arco, who wrote in the dialect of Rome. This contemporary vernacular poetry in the language of Rome is totally different from what we know of the classics of Roman poets like Belli or Trilussa, corrosive, intensely realistic, political satire. Here, this vernacular poetry from Rome is sweet, expressive, gently surreal. We are on a totally different level from the classics of Roman poetry in Roman dialect. Again, the character here, both in the selection of poetry and in the musical setting, is that of a set of miniatures, nostalgic, utterly charming. The final set belonging in this newly recorded and just released CD, Trifuretti di Santo Francesco, is particularly interesting here. The set includes 3 chapters from anonymous devotional Christian narratives from the late Middle Ages. Here they date back to the mid-late 1300s. This is ancient prose, not even poetry. This is poetic prose about the life and miracles of Saint Francis of Assisi. The text is composed by Castelnuovo-Tedesco into a most inspired set, a real triptych. What was a triptych? What is a triptych in a church? 3 panels of religious and at the same time realistic scenes that are placed one next to the other, generating powerful contrasting effects. In composing these musical scenes, Castelnuovo-Tedesco, who had grown up in Florence and had a profound visual arts culture, must have been influenced by the visual stories of the episodes of the life of Saint Francis, the mature frescoes by Giotto in the Church of Santa Croce. Characterized by emotional intensity of the scene, opening of the space, and realism, the composer tells his narrative of popular faith, displaying wide openings of layers of sound. The set was originally conceived for voice and orchestra. It's an indivisible cycle in which Castelnuovo-Tedesco was an indisputable master. The three panels compose a whole and a religious and moral narrative through music. It's a real altarpiece, like in a church. And I would like to conclude my remarks saying how remarkable this is. Castelnuovo-Tedesco was Jewish, here set in a text of Christian devotion. In the pre-racial laws years, being a Jewish intellectual, artist and composer in Italy meant being Italian, totally permeated with Italian cultures and idioms. It's important to remember that in the process of unification of Italy in the 19th century Risorgimento, Jewish intellectuals played an important role, and Italian Jews were integrated into the Italian community. In conclusion, Castelnuovo-Tedesco was an indisputable master of setting poetry to music in creating art songs in many languages. As for the Italian language, he excelled in setting to music not just many different aspects of the Italian language, but truly the most diverse Italian languages from diverse cultural backgrounds and time periods. Masterful. Thank you.
Thank you, Aloma. I would like to now, there we go. I would like to speak about the honor that I have of being a performing artist who is also an academic singer. I, like all classical singers, I've been trained in languages, and my initial, I would say that Italian was the first foreign language that I absolutely fell in love with. And so to be able to record this beautiful music in the Italian language has been such an honor and pleasure for me. And it's also an honor and pleasure to be working with this group of experts here from, of course, with Catherine and her exquisite playing, but from Aloma's research, this project would have never come to fruition without Aloma's work in collecting these rare scores from the time of the early 20th century in Italy, Jewish composers. Because as you know, with World War II and the racial laws, this music was suppressed. It was published at the time, but it was essentially buried in the rubble of the war and has yet to truly be reclaimed. And I hope you will hear, if you listen to the CD or in the clips that we're playing, that this music, if it were not to have been reclaimed, there would be a huge loss to the picture of what was going on musically in Europe in the first part of the 20th century. So we have that aspect that is so important in first recordings of this music. The other aspect is that we all are fully aware of Italian opera. Italian opera is near and dear to all of our hearts. But in the late 19th and early 20th century, there was a real flowering of Italian vocal music that was outside of the genre of opera. And in fact, operatic composers had always written songs, but I don't know that they got exported I don't think they made as much money possibly as the operas did. But Italian composers were very busy writing these liriche da camera, is the Italian term for art song. And so all the great composers of the late 19th and early 20th century were writing songs, and they each had their own really unique style. And with Castelnuovo-Tedesco, I think what you'll hear is, first of all, each setting is, like Aloma said, truly unique and telling the story in music of each of these poems that he felt was beautiful enough to set or interesting enough to set. And so we have a very unique approach to each of these groups of texts. But you'll also hear the kind of extended tonalities he's dealing with, the exquisite piano writing, because he was a concert pianist. And we're going to hear more about his specific capabilities from Jim later. But I wanted to give you a sense right now of what his music sounded like. So you can start to put him in context with the great composers of that time. I'm thinking specifically of somebody, a sound world you could keep in mind while you're taking this music in when I play it here in a second, is Debussy on the one hand was a contemporary, Mahler was a contemporary, Poulenc a little later, but a contemporary. So he's in this world that has all of these influences, but his voice is completely his own. And what I think it really stands out is everything we love about Italian vocal music. There's passion, there's an understanding of the way the voice works. Italians are all singers. They all know what feels wonderful to sing. And the other thing is that he understands the language so well that his declamation sings the line itself. You don't have to work to make these musical lines sound so natural and so beautiful because they're so well set. So I would like to play the second of the Trifuretti di Santo Francesco that Loma mentioned. I'm going to share my screen and let you watch the score and see the translation as we work our way through the second of this triptych. And I want you to listen to how he creates this very dramatic scene, because the second of the Tre Fioretti is the story of Santo Francesco casting out the demon of hate when two brothers start to fight, and that opens the door for the demon to possess one of the brothers. And this is how he exorcises the demon. So I'm going to begin to share my screen now. Share computer sound. Okay. And I am sharing. I am going to start the recording, and here we go. So, there we go. I caught it in time to stop the next one. There we go. So I would love to get some commentary now from my wonderful colleague, Catherine Goodson, and of course, all of you about what I consider to be some of the most unique aspects of this music. Catherine, would you like to talk about the whole pianistic world of Castelnuovo-Tedesco?
Sure, I would love to. Thank you. As I was listening and thinking about learning all those notes and all those colors, and thinking about his life as described by Jim and everybody else who knew about him and knows him and was related to him and everything, but I'm thinking if he had gone back and orchestrated those after his years in the cinema, even though, as I understand, the cinema was maybe not always perfect in terms of the art form he would choose, but he would have known what to do because there's such extraordinary vision in the colors in that piece. I was also thinking that it's so motivic, specifically those long ones, the Santo Francesco. I almost thought of like a leitmotif from Wagner. It comes back in the themes, da da dee da da dee dee da, and then da dee da 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 dee da da dee da. It's the same theme over and over again in so many different ways. It's really extraordinary. And to try to get all those colors on a piano, as wonderful as a piano is, it still sounds like a piano, you know, and you do everything you can with pedals. I know he was an extraordinary pianist because he demanded more from me than any other composer I think I've experienced, or almost any other, in terms of using all three pedals, not just the una corda, which makes things quieter and more muted, and not just the sustaining pedal, but also the one in the middle in which you sustain one long note, and then you can have all these other colors around it that are maybe staccato, very short, while you have the bass still sounding. And so it made my brain hurt, as one of my students yesterday told me when she's learning a new piece. She's like, my brain hurts. And I remember that last summer, my brain was hurting trying to figure out ways to do everything, and yet to make it sound as flowing and as gorgeously lyrical as it is. And I know from Jim in our conversation last week that Castelnuovo-Tedesco himself would just play, and would play from memory, and would improvise, and would play pieces full stop that were already in his brain. But since I'm not that kind of a musical genius, I had to really work hard and use a metronome and do all sorts of things so that then I could try to feel free. And I think, if I think about the Stella Cadente, I want to just mention the last three of those. They are all miniatures, but the last three of those really long ones, and each one has a different mood and a different set of colors. And well, it was really, really rewarding. And I would say they are difficult pieces to give to a young pianist. They are difficult pieces to give to a young singer. You need to have them listen, but you need to give them to people who really want to delve into them and try to mine all the riches that are within them.
Just like you might not want to give not want to give Debussy's Ariette oubliée to a freshman, right?
Exactly.
These pieces are for definitely mature training for professional musicians. I know that Catherine and I worked for hours on ensemble. I worked for hours trying to understand the whole scope of that long piece, and that's not the longest piece. The third of the Trifuretti, I think, was it 27 pages or something like that. So to get that whole scope in takes a lot of work on the front end, but once it's together, it becomes this seamless story. But it does take a lot of preparation. Catherine?
I just wanted to throw out a few more composer names that I think I thought about while I was learning them and as I was listening again. So I already mentioned Wagner, who was, of course, much earlier. but the leitmotif, having this motive that returns and returns in so many ways. And if he had orchestrated it, maybe given it to different woodwinds and that sort of thing. But also I thought about Schoenberg, an early Schoenberg, and the really opus, I think it's the opus 2, this really lush music. I may be wrong on that, but the very, Schenk mir dein goldenes Kam, that it sounds so rich and expressionistic. And then Respighi, who sounds rich and romantic, but is very impressionistic as well. And even Maurice Ravel, with the precision, the absolute specific kinds of articulation requested and required, not just pedaling, but it's not a dot, it's a caret and a dot, and it's a caret and a dot with a slur over the top. And what do you do with all of that? And that's only one of the 10 fingers you're playing at the same time, that kind of thing. But really extraordinary, and I'm so excited to hear it all come together. When you're in the middle of a project, sometimes you don't see the light at the end of the tunnel, and you don't hear how it's all going to be. So I think that was everything I had to say. Thank you.
Well, what I would, because you were talking about all of these pianistic details, I'd love to have Jim talk about Castelnuovo-Tedesco and his relationship to the piano because of his special guest in his studio. You need unmute there.
Thank you. Thank you. And first, I just want to compliment Carolyn and both of you for your performance. It was really great. And every time I hear it and talk to you, something new comes to mind, and I say, "Oh my goodness, I'll talk about that." But we could go for hours. But what I do want to mention, and I want to pull back because sitting behind my left shoulder is Mario's piano, and the piano did mean the world to him. He received his first Steinway for his bar mitzvah from his father, and it was important because initially his father wasn't happy with him pursuing this career, and in many ways, bar mitzvah he became a man, but his father also acknowledged that he felt Mario had something to contribute. It meant so much to him, and from that point on, he was a Steinway man. He was Steinway all the way. When he came to America, he signed a contract with Steinway as a performer. And the first year when they were in Larchmont, Steinway lent him a piano to take home to rehearse, get ready for performances. When they moved to Los Angeles, he purchased this Steinway. It's a 1911 Model O, and he fell in love with it. And said there was never another piano that he needed. The sweet sound that came out of this piano was everything that he wanted out of a piano, and it plays remarkably well. The joy of having it here is wonderful in that you feel his presence here, not only just because it's there, and you also feel a burden because it's like, typically I will play off on this keyboard as much because I'm intimidated by the piano and by who's played on it. And I've had pianist friends who come by who have played Mario's music on that piano. And you just cannot help be moved emotionally because it just reverberates out of that. Now, the other thing I want to mention about the piano is Mario actually didn't compose at the piano. Sitting next to his piano at an angle was a drafting table, and he would compose at that table. Mario's memory is something that I'm continually working on, trying to understand. We would in some ways say it was a photographic memory, but the word photograph isn't the right word. It isn't that he would look at a score and immediately burn that image in his mind and he could reproduce it. His mind was so musical that he captured the sounds in his head, and he composed in his head. I mean, he could hold that much in his mind musically. And as a young man, there are many stories. He entertained his friends as a young man. Donizetti opera, he could sit down and play the whole opera. and to everyone's delight. When it came time to receive his diploma from the conservatory, he had a sight reading requirement. And they were going to put a symphony in front of him, and it was, I think, I can't remember, Mendelssohn or whatever. He said, no, I already know that. So I can't, that's not sight reading, I can play it without. And they said, well, should we get a Beethoven? Ultimately, they had to find a manuscript from one of the jurors who Mario had never seen, for him to sight read it from manuscript to convince them, oh yes, he can sight read. The other thing is going in connection to Catherine and Carolyn. In Italy, he had a reputation as an accompanist and was well known and well appreciated because he accompanied without music. And the audiences just loved the fact that, you know, there you'd be in there, no music, but it really reinforced the collaboration of the piano and the singer. And I think we see that in your performance. But for a number of reasons. Number one, because Mario's piano composition is equally important to the voice, that you guys are interacting and together are telling the story. It isn't ever a matter of the piano just kind of accompanying the voice as it goes along. Now, to just briefly get into a little bit of Mario's experience, we talked earlier about, I think Carolyn mentioned Mario's voice. Mario's musical voice, it was established early on, and he can even tell us kind of the moment when it became clear. And it had to do with Debussy. I think it wasn't until he heard Debussy that suddenly it dawned on him, I can do this. It had to do with his realization that harmony could be so much more than just what, you know, the contrapuntal text, everything he learned. Suddenly that opened up a whole new world to him. And his voice came to him. And that voice stayed with him, because it's important to understand his coming to America didn't change his musical voice. There wasn't, you can't say, oh, this happened and then he became this way. That voice was there. And he had immense confidence in that voice. And so he talks about certain modernist gimmicks, and he kind of chuckled. It's like, well, that's fine, but is it really music? With his students, one of the great things, and at this piano, I should mention, of course, Heifetz would have played with Heifetz at this piano. Gieseken came to Los Angeles and played at this piano. Segovia would have sat, they would have worked things out at this piano. But most importantly, or most enjoyably to me, he taught at that piano. So that was the piano that John Williams and Henry Mancini and Jerry Goldsmith all would have sat at and worked through. But going back to Mario's voice, Mario's skill as a teacher was his ability to inspire confidence in his students. He was not a teacher who would cut and slash and say, you're no good, this is blah, 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 you don't do that. Jerry Goldsmith once told me, he said that every time he left a lesson with Mario, he was a better musician on the way out the door than he was coming in. And it was like, well, what did that exactly mean? And one of the things that meant, and Henry Mancini said this, that Mario would have them bring work, that sometimes it was studio work, that they were composing something. He said, whatever you're working on, bring it. And then let's say Jerry Goldsmith would be playing through it and he would apologize, I'm not a very good pianist. And Mario would probably say, yes, I know, but play through it. And then finish, and he would point to a section and he would say, this is you, this part here. This part in front, it's just bad Wagner. That Wagner, dump that. And so then Jerry would suddenly realize, you're right, that was what that was me there. And so Mario helped other composers find their voice. And when we talk about the success of his students, I don't attribute their success to Mario taught them chord progressions or he taught them counterpoint, which he did, and it was very important. But what he taught them was that how to see themselves. and how it gave them the confidence to go out and, in a very vicious studio world, that they remained confident enough to do what they were going to do. Now, Mario loved to tell stories, and we did through music, and he really felt that Hollywood was going to be a good place for him. What he didn't realize was he couldn't tell his stories. A film would be assigned as a staff composer, maybe like, I think Gaslight, for example. I think there were 13 composers assigned, and they would come to a meeting in the morning and saying, here's reel 1, reel 2, reel 3, reel 4, and they would each be given a reel. The head of the department would play a few themes, come back this afternoon with the music. And Mario could do it, but he didn't enjoy it. I mean, because he knew what the MGM sound was, and that's what they were paying to give him. So he couldn't do what he wanted to do, but he did what they asked, and then they would come back and orchestra would perform it. And of course, his reputation was such that any music he composed needed no corrections. They may have to stop one of them and fix this and fix that, but his music was what it was because it came out of his head fully composed. Now, the great plus for all of this, and he repeated many, many times, he never could have been the musician he was without Hollywood, for two reasons. One, he had access to some of the best performers in the world. The studio musicians were just top notch, but equally important, his orchestration. Because he said, nowhere in the world could I sit down and compose something in the morning and that afternoon take it to an orchestra and hear it. And so he said, that was my seminar in orchestration. It wasn't until then that he could really understand and appreciate. And so when you talk about these songs being very orchestral, they are, and his sense of orchestration was great. I guess that's pretty much everything that I wanted to stress. One last thing in with these songs, for example, now that you've heard them, think back at them. At the end of each score, he would write the dates that they were composed, and this 2 or 3 days. I want you just to draw your attention to the fact that really what he was saying, these are the days that I notated these scores. And think back on what we were listening to, the complexity of that music. When he sat down to compose, it was already done. He was just notating it out on paper. And I'm continually amazed at the mind that he had, that it just existed in his head.
Well, thank you, Jim, for that absolutely fascinating look into what his compositional life was like in California after he immigrated. I'm really sad that when he got to the United States, that the market for writing songs was essentially non-existent.
Totally non-existent.
Because the tradition of art song recitals was so popular and well established in Europe, but here in the United States, that was never a great moneymaker for classical musicians. So thank goodness that he found a field that he could be fully his own musician in, at least eventually, in terms of teaching and composing and orchestrating. But I sure would love to hear all those songs that he would have written. Even now, he immigrated when he was 39, Diana?
Sorry, 44 years old. Mm-hmm.
And so but his total song output was something like 220 songs. Is that right? And the majority.
That sounds about right.
Were the majority of those written before he came to the United States?
Yes.
I was just saying, 220 songs, and essentially, if he had kept writing, who knows how many more songs we could have had.
Might have been doubled, right. He went more into choral music and other ways to use the human voice. It goes without saying that the human voice was one of his favorite means of expression, especially the soprano voice, but he just had to find other ways to bring that to life. And given the realities of what was being requested by publishers and writers.
And one thing not to overlook, the one avenue that throughout his career that you cannot thank enough or think enough about is Segovia, because both in Italy and both in America, his guitar music was, his guitar works were never forgotten. Mm-hmm. And it meant the world to him, meaning that even he's just a staff composer here in Los Angeles for a while. He was still one of the leading guitar composers in the world. And the guitarists were faithful to the end. They never forgot, they never turned away from Mario.
So that's interesting, that repertoire, that piece of his compositional voice was one that continued uninterrupted by his emigration. I think that's really fascinating to think about. I remember when I was preparing for the notes, the CD comes with a booklet, an extensive booklet that Aloma and I worked on over a lot of time. And excuse me, James?
It's a very beautiful set of liner notes.
And beautiful photographs from Diana's archives. And, oh shoot, what was I gonna say? When I was reading his Una Vita di Musica, I was, when I hit this paragraph, I almost fell off my chair. He talked about how he always felt, he and Clara, his wife, always felt like his songs were the most personal and essentially real version of himself as a composer. And I thought, oh my Lord, what a service it is to have more of his songs out there so that people can hear them, learn to love them, perform them, ask for more additions to be created. And my greatest wish would be that some amazing artist somewhere would hear this music and seek to bring it to the highest level of its well-deserved notoriety and place within the canon. I did have one more clip to play. I wanted to contrast that large orchestral concert piece that we played, the second of the Trifuretti di Santo Francesco. I wanted to contrast that with one of the Stelle Cadenti, one of the shooting stars. These, the Stelle Cadenti are 12 miniatures. Catherine calls them mercurial miniatures. That Aloma mentioned in her piece. They are so intimate and as well as so personal, they remind me of the Wolf Italienisches Liederbuch. You have sometimes 2 pages is all the song lasts, but you get such a unique portrait of a character and what they're dealing with emotionally. So in contrast to the longest song on the CD, which is 27 pages, I'm going to play you a 2-page song from Stelle Cadenti about a woman who wants to marry a bell ringer. Let me get ready to, I'm sharing my screen. Sorry, I have to narrate myself so that I can. Okay, here we go. I'm going to start the music and then. sorry for that sound glitch that happened.
Okay.
It's beautiful.
But sorry, I just wanted to make sure I had fixed all the other things that were going on. Great. So what I think is so amazing about that piece is that even though it's only 2 pages long, there's so much detail in what's going on.
It really is. And
Right.
the last 2 chords are just like guitar chords.
Yeah.
And the bell, the way you can hear that duck ringing, is just, it's so descriptive and so dramatic and so communicative in just 2 pages. So there are 20, I've got the CD right here, there are 26 tracks on this CD, 26 individual examples of how he sets Italian. Of course, Aloma has been part of recordings of his English language songs. He set texts in French and German and Russian, or am I correct about that, Aloma?
Yes, in many languages.
Not Russian.
Latin.
I made that up, sorry, forget I said that.
Russian, I can't recall.
And he always, he preferred to write in the language, not in, there are only a few instances where he wrote in translation.
Translations, exactly. Yes.
Right. Some Hebrew in his synagogue music, not much, but a bit.
So when you are looking for Castelnuovo-Tedesco songs to perform, remember that there is a variety of languages that he set, and he understood the languages that he set in very well. I think Aloma would say that his English language settings, especially say of Walt Whitman, he even did Shakespeare, didn't he?
Yes.
The prosody is very, very good.
He particularly admired the English language and its musical qualities.
Yes.
So let me hand it back to you, Diana, to take us home. But thank you so much for being the host for today and the moderator.
Well, absolutely. We've covered a lot of ground and heard so many insights, and I just want to end on a note of thank you. First and foremost, Caroline and Catherine, to you for making these songs and this music available, giving us a chance to hear this important part of Mario's output. And also thank Aloma and Jim for their insights, and thank our listeners, viewers, for watching today as well.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.